After Rome left Britain, the island didn't become free. It became exposed. The roads were still there, the stone ruins were still there, but the people who kept the system alive were gone. No pay for soldiers, no officials to enforce law, no dependable trade to keep towns breathing. In the silence that followed, Britain fractured into small pockets of survival. And into that vacuum came the people who would reshape the island and, without realizing it, begin the long birth of England. They arrived from across the North Sea in waves, not as one grand army but as many small movements. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Some came as warriors, some as settlers with families, tools, seed, and animals. They landed on coasts and moved along rivers, taking advantage of weak defenses and abandoned land. In a world where food was security, fertile ground mattered more than speeches or symbols. The newcomers stayed because Britain, after Rome, could not stop them in any coordinated way. At first, the change was slow. A few settlements, a few clashes, a few bargains. But decades turned temporary into permanent. Villages grew into networks. Local Britons were pushed westward, absorbed, or forced into new arrangements. Languages mixed, but the newcomers' speech spread widest. The Roman style of urban life shrank. People moved closer to fields, water, and protection. Town life faded. The countryside became the center again. Daily life was hard, physical, and close to the earth. Most people lived in small wooden homes with thatch roofs, clustered near fields and grazing land. A good harvest meant survival, a bad one meant hunger. Winter was a test of planning. Firewood, grain, salted meat, and luck decided who made it to spring. There were no large national reserves, no empire to backstop disaster. Families depended on neighbors, and neighbors depended on leadership. Power in this age was personal. There was no England yet, only competing kingdoms. A king was not an abstract office. A king was a man who could protect you. He won loyalty by winning fights, distributing land, and rewarding followers. Around him stood a war band, men tied to him by oaths, gifts, and reputation. If a king failed, loyalty evaporated. That made politics violent and unstable. Kingdoms rose and fell fast. Borders shifted with every strong leader and every weak heir. Over time, a rough map of power emerged. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex, alongside smaller realms. Historians later called this the heptarchy, not because it was neat, but because it captured the reality. Many centers, many rivalries, no single authority. Alliances were temporary. Betrayal was common. Marriage could secure peace for a year and restart war the next. Yet beneath the violence, something practical was forming. Habits and systems. Local assemblies, councils of elders, and gatherings where disputes could be settled. Customary law began to harden into codes. These early laws were not modern ideals of justice. They were tools to stop communities from tearing themselves apart. Compensation mattered. Wergild, the man price, tried to replace endless revenge with an agreed payment. Theft, injury, and even insult could be measured, fined, and resolved. It sounds cold, but it was a survival tool, a way to keep one death from turning into a chain of killings. Social rank also became clearer. At the top were kings and nobles. Beneath them were thanes, free warriors and landholders who served in war. Beneath them were chorls, free peasants who farmed, paid dues, and could rise with luck and service. And below that were enslaved people captured in war or trapped by debt. This hierarchy created order, but it also created obligations. Protection in exchange for work, loyalty in exchange for land. Defense slowly became more organized too. When danger came, kings could call on the fyrd, a local militia of free men. It was not a professional army, but it was a sign of learning. Survival required coordinated response, not just individual bravery. Still, the system was uneven. Some kingdoms organized better than others, and distance remained an enemy. By the time one region raised forces, another might already be burning. Religion returned as a quiet network that crossed borders. Christianity had not vanished after Rome, but it was scattered and fragile. Missionaries and monasteries slowly rebuilt it. A monastery could be a place of shelter, memory, and record. It preserved writing when much of society turned oral. Even when kingdoms fought, Christian ideas traveled along routes of trade and pilgrimage. Over generations, shared rituals and shared stories created thin threads of connection across a divided island. And then there was language. Latin declined. Old English grew. It was practical and flexible, shaped by daily life, farming, weather, and war. Shared language creates shared identity. even when politics stay fragmented. People began to recognize familiar words and customs beyond their village. That doesn't create a nation overnight, but it plants the first seed, the feeling that you belong to something wider than a single tribe. Trade slowly returned too, smaller than Roman trade but real. Markets formed where paths crossed. Salt, iron tools, wool, grain, and simple crafts moved from place to place. Coastal contact linked parts of Britain to Scandinavia and the continent. With trade came news, and with news came awareness. The world was larger, and threats could come from beyond the horizon. Still, the sea remained a weakness. Coastal settlements were exposed. Raiders could arrive without warning, strike, and vanish. No central authority could coordinate defense across the island. Each kingdom protected itself, and often too late. This was the lesson of the Anglo Saxon age. Division is dangerous. England's future empire would depend on systems and unity, but first England had to learn what happens without them. In the great timber halls of local lords, politics was performed face to face. Feasts were not just celebrations, they were contracts. A lord proved generosity by giving rings, weapons, and food. In return, men promised service. Stories were recited to strengthen identity, praising courage, and warning against treachery. Even centuries later, poems like Beowulf carry the sound of that world. Loyalty tested by danger, order threatened by chaos, leaders judged by what they protect. Agriculture slowly improved as communities adapted to Britain's soils and seasons. Heavy plows, shared fields, and cooperative harvests made some regions more productive. But growth created new problems. More land disputes, more raids, more need for rules. And as Anglo-Saxon control spread, the Britons who resisted were pushed into the west, into Wales and Cornwall, where older languages and identities survived. Britain was no longer one cultural landscape. It was layered, and every layer remembered a different past. As Christianity strengthened, bishops and abbots gained influence, sometimes acting as advisors to kings and as diplomats between rival courts. Monasteries copied texts, kept chronicles, and introduced a wider sense of time, years, reigns, and records, so power could be remembered and compared. Small mints and coin use returned in some areas, making trade easier and taxes more imaginable. These were small steps, but they mattered. They trained England to think in systems again. By the end of this period, England was not strong, but it was becoming something new. Not Roman, not Celtic, not unified, but shaped by survival, by local order, by shared language, and by constant insecurity. The island was learning, slowly, the most expensive truth in politics. If you cannot hold yourself together, someone else will do it for you. And just as these foundations were settling into place, a sharper terror began to appear on the horizon. Long ships, shallow drafts, quick strikes. The Vikings were coming very soon.